For more than a decade now, we've seen this relentless cycle in Iran. Uprising, followed by repression, followed by another uprising. It's this incredible story of a nation that just keeps rising up, and a state that has gotten systematically better at trying to control them. So to really get what's happening in Iran today, we've got to go back and trace this whole pattern of defiance.
You've almost certainly heard this powerful Kurdish slogan, Jin, Jiyan, Azadi. In 2022, it became the rallying cry for an entire generation. But you know, it didn't just appear out of thin air. It's really the culmination of years and years of struggle. A three-word declaration that's built on a long and, frankly, painful history of protest.
And that really is the central question here, isn't it? As we're about to see, both the people's tactics and the state's violence have just escalated and escalated in this incredibly high-stakes duel for the future of Iran. So we're going to walk through 5 distinct waves of protest. Think of each one as a chapter in this ongoing story, starting with this flicker of hope back in 2009 and building all the way up to a nationwide firestorm. Okay, so let's rewind back to 2009. This was the first massive post-revolution challenge to the regime. It was born right in the early days of the social media era, and it basically created a playbook for both protest and for repression that would define everything that came next.
So the trigger, a presidential election that millions of people were convinced was stolen. The slogan was so simple and so powerful. Where is my vote? But here's what was truly groundbreaking: the organizing tools. This was one of the first major global protests where platforms like Twitter and Facebook were actually used to get millions of people out on the streets, and it totally caught the regime off guard.
And the scale of this was just staggering. I mean, just take a second to think about that number. At its peak, an estimated 3 to 5 million people were out protesting across the country. To put that into perspective, these were the biggest demonstrations Iran had seen since the 1979 revolution itself.
But the state's response was, as you might guess, swift and absolutely brutal. The Basij militia, this huge volunteer paramilitary force that's fiercely loyal to the regime, was just unleashed on the crowds. They carried out mass arrests, they used lethal force, and the final death toll is estimated to be somewhere between 80 and 200 people. And this was such a critical moment because it established the state's playbook. When you challenge us, we will not hesitate to kill our own citizens.
All right, let's fast forward a few years to the next phase, because if 2009 was about political rights, this period, from 2017 to 2019, was all about economic survival. The protests became more widespread, way more desperate, and the state's response? Well, it became exponentially more deadly.
So in late 2017, believe it or not, protests erupted over the price of eggs. But that small spark quickly spiraled into a nationwide revolt against government corruption and these really expensive foreign interventions. You can see it in the slogan, "Leave Syria, think of us." All that public anger had turned inward. This time, the key organizing tool was the encrypted messaging app Telegram. And once again, the crackdown was incredibly severe.
And this is where things take a really dark turn. By 2019, the state was ready, and it had a new and terrifying weapon in its arsenal. Something designed to let it commit violence in total darkness.
So when a sudden fuel price hike sparked massive protests in November of 2019, the government just flipped a switch. For 5 whole days, they imposed a near-total internet blackout, effectively cutting Iran off from the rest of the world. And this allowed security forces to operate with total impunity, hidden from the eyes of international media and human rights groups.
The result of that blackout was just horrifying, and this chart makes it painfully clear. Look at the jump. In 2009, the death toll was in the dozens. In the darkness of November 2019, that number skyrocketed. While Amnesty International was able to confirm 304 deaths, a Reuters investigation cited sources inside Iran suggesting the real number was closer to 1,500 people killed. In just a few days, the escalation is just undeniable.
The next wave of protests shows how the reasons people were risking their lives were broadening even further. It was shifting from politics and economics to the most fundamental right of all, the right to survive.
In 2021, the oil-rich but drought-stricken province of Khuzestan just erupted. Years of government mismanagement and, of course, climate change had left people literally without water. Their slogan was, "I am thirsty." It was a literal cry for help, and the state's answer, once again, was not aid, but bullets.
And all of this brings us to 2022, and the movement that shook the Islamic Republic to its absolute core.
This was without a doubt the largest, longest, and most defiantly female-led uprising in the nation's history.
It all started with the death of one young woman, Mahsa Amini, arrested for supposedly wearing her hijab improperly. Her death in custody ignited a nationwide firestorm. The images that came out were just unforgettable. Women cutting their hair, burning their headscarves in these incredible public acts of defiance. And look at how the tools evolved. To fight back against the state's advanced digital surveillance, protesters were now using sophisticated VPNs and encrypted apps.
The regime responded with just overwhelming force in more than 160 cities. At least 551 people were killed by security forces, and that number tragically included 68 children, a detail that just underscores the indiscriminate nature of the violence.
And it wasn't just the killings. We're talking about mass arrests on a scale that had never been seen before. Over 22,000 people. And these weren't just activists. They were students, journalists, artists, lawyers, just ordinary citizens, all swept up in this attempt to completely crush the movement.
The brutality was so systematic, so widespread, that a United Nations mission delivered this damning verdict. They called the state's actions crimes against humanity. That is a major international designation, and it confirms that what happened wasn't just random violence, but a calculated attack against the Iranian people.
So, when you step back and look at all 5 of these waves together, you start to see this chillingly clear pattern emerge. The Iranian state hasn't just been reacting. It's developed a methodical, repeatable playbook for crushing dissent.
And you can almost list the steps. First, you flood the streets with the Revolutionary Guard and the Basij. Then, you use lethal force. Step 3, impose an internet blackout to hide what you're doing. Then come the mass arrests, the coerced confessions through torture, and finally these show trials in revolutionary courts that hand down incredibly harsh sentences. This isn't chaos. It's a cold, calculated strategy.
This slide right here, this really sums it all up. You can see how both sides have evolved. In 2009, you had protesters using basic social media and SMS messages, and they were met by militias on the street. Fast forward to 2022, and you have leaderless cells using encrypted apps and VPNs, but now they're up against IRGC snipers, total digital surveillance, and that all-powerful internet kill switch. It's become a deadly arms race of tactics and technology.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely crucial question. We've seen a state that refuses to reform and seems to only respond with force. And at the same time, we've seen a population whose demand for freedom and dignity has proven impossible to put out no matter the cost. These two forces seem locked on a collision course. So what happens next time? What happens when the next spark lands?